Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our very first Community Hour of 2021. The purpose of the Community Hour series is to virtually connect with all Converged user group members. These are held not every other Thursday like last year. We have switched this year and they will be held monthly every third Thursday at our new time, 12 p.m. Eastern, to discuss a variety of topics based on member interests. So be sure to share future topic ideas with our team. If you missed any of the past few community hours from last year, they are posted on our website on the resources page. And in case you are not familiar with the Converged user group, we are a customer-led community connecting members, exploring Dell converged and hyper-converged solutions to share ideas, best practices, and experiences. We've got a great community hour lined up for you today, so please use the Q&A function for any questions and the chat function for discussions with your peers during today's conversation. Speakers will respond to questions during or at the end of today's discussion. As mentioned, your feedback helps us plan future sessions, so please participate in any surveys and polls that we will be using today. All participants will be entered into a drawing to win some great prizes. So with that, I will pass it along to David Giesica.
All right, thank you very much, Hollis, and welcome everybody. Folks, how do you hear me? Panel, can I get a thumbs up if you hear me okay? All right, fantastic, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining. As Hollis said, this is our first Converged Community Hour of 2021. They were really fun last year, though we'd all love to be in person. But until we're in person, we're going to bring this to you and expand the community virtually. I am back with a fantastic panel and a great program for you today. My regular co-host, Jonathan Toulon, the president of the Converged User Group, is on assignment. We look forward to getting him back into the studio with us soon for some updates. But in his stead, we've got a great panel of special guests. I'd like to introduce Matt Wakefield as the Vice President of the Converged User Group, and he's also Director of Platform Services at Oshkosh Corporation. That's with a small K. Suzanne Pickett is on the Converged Board of Directors and also Director of Product Acceleration for Dell Technologies, otherwise known as Dell Digital, the internal IT department for all of Dell Corporation. Really, really great to have her here. And Jason Marks, our Senior Principal Engineer, Integrated Products and Solutions for Technical Marketing at Dell Technologies, is our subject matter expert today. And we're going to have a fantastic conversation. So thank you, panel, for joining. Great to have you here. Before we get started, folks, I encourage you to please use the chat, use the Q&A to get involved in the conversation. We won't unmute you. We haven't figured out how to do that yet. We may. But until we get there, what we'll do is please engage with us through the chat. We really encourage you to do that. And what we're doing this year is we're also going to have a few polling questions during our sessions so that we can see, we'll ask you some questions, we'll see the live results, and then we'll all be able to discuss as appropriate. So before we get started, Hollis, if you could queue up polling questions 1 and 2, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. I also want to thank the team, Hollis and Ann, for making this possible. It's fantastic, and we really enjoy it. So we've got the poll open, and as we work through this, I think, Jason, we were talking yesterday. I'd love it if you could help set the table for the conversation. We're talking Kubernetes and Tanzu on VxRail, Tanzu on, or Kubernetes on CI and HCI. I think the marketplace is in an interesting time. You talk to a lot of customers. You're really tied into the market. What are you seeing? Help us, like, why should we be paying attention to this? And then yesterday you were talking about this new concept, the new stack. So if you could kind of just hit on all of that stuff and get us ready to go, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me and welcome everyone to today's meeting. I hope everybody finds this worth your time. I think to kind of get started, you kind of need to understand the 10,000 foot view. What is the bigger picture and kind of what has got us to where we are today? You know, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants and how in the world of technology, It's always evolving. And there are new capabilities that allow businesses to perform new things, or to allow new business models to take hold because of evolutions in the technology marketplace. And so what's happened over the past kind of, let's say 2 decades or so, has been kind of 2 massive waves of transformation and disruption in the area of IT infrastructure, as well as in the computer science space with application development. And really where the kind of Kubernetes conversation comes into play as it relates to running different types of applications on new infrastructure like VxRail as an example, is really the culmination of these 2 big idea disruptive trends intersecting with each other. So let's start with the infrastructure, right? Everyone, I would say, on this call is very familiar with a lot of the legacy ways and responsibilities that IT infrastructure administration work would entail, right? You kind of had a need for compute, network, and storage infrastructure in the past. All of these components were delivered as hardware components and were kind of deployed as separate siloed entities in which IT organizations were responsible for integrating and managing on their own. But what's happened over the past few years, VMware really started this trend back in the 90s, was to develop virtualization technology, being a way in which I can deliver on these compute, network, and storage services, and at least in the 90s, compute services to start, with how I can deliver servers in a software-based way, and how I can abstract and pool CPU and memory resources so that I can gain better utilization of that physical server infrastructure to run multiple virtual machines. Now, that was a game changer, right? And in and of itself, that spawned a lot of utilization benefits and cost savings for many businesses, but a lot of that was still kind of trapped within IT. What's happened over the past couple of years, or a couple of decades, is kind of the evolution towards cloud. And what ultimately is cloud? It's really the full abstraction of infrastructure, which includes the virtualization of storage and networking, and then being able to apply automation to that infrastructure through some level of programmatic means. So now you're delivering a way in which I consume those compute, network, and storage resources as abstracted pools, and they can then be consumed through an automation or programmatic way, which is kind of where the infrastructure as code kind of term came from, rather than requiring a physical human to respond to a ticket request from a business user, and then manually go and access those infrastructure devices to configure them and provision those resources as needed. What we now have is a fully dynamic virtualized data center. Software-defined data center is kind of the term that VMware uses, in which you virtualized all of the compute, network, and storage, and can then deliver the provisioning of that resource via an automated means through automation tooling and any type of kind of as a service oriented operating models. So that's step 1, right? Being able to have this fully abstracted pool of resources that seems infinite to the consumer of those resources. And that's kind of what people assume as cloud today. If you go look at the public cloud providers like the Amazons, AWSs of the world, and the Azures and so forth, it's really being able to consume these infrastructure services, but it looks like they're massively infinite pools of resources that I have access to and can purchase. Now, when I have that new infrastructure baseline and the capability of providing that level of automation, that dynamic way that I can consume those resources when I need it, it really now paves the way to intersect it with the new way in which applications are being developed and new application architectures that can take advantage of this dynamic environment. And that's where this kind of idea of cloud native application architectures come in. So now you have developers that have a new set of tools to design applications to take advantage of these automated pools of underlying infrastructure resources so that they can dynamically expand or contract the application resources they need on demand and automatically based on environmental conditions or the amount of users that are accessing the application. And the way in which we can scale these net new applications, which are ultimately being developed for new customer interaction purposes as a new way to essentially do business with my customer base through the digital lens of business processes versus calling the business on the phone or walking into a physical store to transact anything. We're all doing things online in the digital world now, and I need that digital presence as a business to hopefully survive, right, and thrive. And these new digital applications are meant to address a much larger user base than most enterprise apps that are kind of catered towards the employee, right, on the back end. So that's kind of where we're all coming in. And so what ultimately makes up the new technology stack beyond that infrastructure, which is software defined, compute, network, and storage, to then support that new level of application, which is cloud native in nature. And that's where new cloud native application platforms or container platforms come into play. So they would be a layer of technology that runs on top of this SDDC infrastructure. And ultimately you run your containerized applications on top of that, and ultimately are able to take advantage of that dynamic and elastic infrastructure underneath. And that's what we kind of look at, or what I've kind of termed as the new stack, because we're starting to see the next generation of applications be developed and packaged and thus deployed as containers and run on some sort of dynamic IaaS type of infrastructure to take advantage of all of this. And so IT organizations now need to figure out, how can I better invest in infrastructure, modern infrastructure that is capable of running these net new containerized or next gen application platform services so that my developers have something to deploy these net new apps onto. And that's kind of where it all comes from, and kind of where we're at today. And the various technologies that you hear in the industry really are just a makeup of those basic foundational building blocks.
That's fantastic, Jason. Thanks for that. It's before we get into the meat of it here, I'd like to get back to, based on what you said, add in, what did the members say to the polling questions? Because I think that'll give us a sense of where the audience is on this journey. I think also it sounds like it's this continuous question of, okay, now we've got new technology. Do we have things set up properly to take advantage, to the most advantage of that? Do we have to learn new things? And I think that's where our conversation's certainly going to go. Hollis, I saw a couple of answers pop up on the polls. I don't know if you can put those back up. If you can, that'd be fantastic. If you can't, do us a favor and let us know, what proportion. Oh, there we go. We've got some poll results. So containers part of the overall digital strategy. Looks like 88% of the folks are it's in there somehow, which is great, and a few folks not so much. And then if so, the next question was, and we'll see, we're working our technology here. So how far are you in the container adoption journey? What's a container is relatively low. That's nice to see. So at least we know where folks are. Research stage. Okay, and you know what? This is probably representative of what we were discussing earlier in the week as we were having our conversations here. So this is great, folks. We've got a lot of folks looking into it, and I'm glad you tuned in. I think that's fantastic. I think this is going to be a conversation that will probably span this year, or if not a couple of years. It seems like this is where we are in the evolution in the IT transformation journey. And then we've got some folks who are well on their way in the container situation. So that's great. Matt, I'd like to just turn it over to you. We discussed Oshkosh, big manufacturer. You've got global reach. You've got everything going everywhere. But tell us, where are you guys on the journey, please? and I think you had a term the other day, pockets of preference. So share where you guys are at, please.
Sure. So I actually want to probably make a comment about that last poll. So I actually don't think those answers are mutually exclusive, because I would say, like a lot of other folks that I've talked to, we're probably, I would have checked yes to every one of those answers, right? We're at multiple phases of this journey. Maybe depending on platform, depending on business unit, we have, as you mentioned, that term pockets of preference, right? I think a lot of us and a lot of folks that I've talked to find in their organizations that where they are may depend on where they've come from. So, if you've got an organization that has got an affinity to a public cloud provider, Azure, an Amazon, they may have started out on this journey using those platforms. If you've got an organization that's got a very heavy VMware implementation, that may be where they're starting from. And I think us, like a lot of organizations, have a little bit of all that, right? So we're seeing, this term I talked about, pockets of preference. There are pockets of this activity going on, but I'd say we like a lot of folks fit every one of those. We've got some things that are in production, still doing research, still trying to figure out the right path. And so I'd say we're, I think if anybody comes and says, that they're in only one of those things, they're probably missing something that's going on somewhere in their organization.
Fair enough. Suzanne, your role is a little different now than it was maybe a year ago, year and a half ago. Certainly the last time we were at the live meeting and you were a board member. Share some of your experience and what you're seeing, please, with folks. And, it always seems that we get these conversations around to the people in the process. So I'd love to hear you guys weigh in also on people in process. And members, shoot questions into the chat. We've got some interesting poll answers. Matt's got a great perspective on what the results look like and how he interprets those. So please engage in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason nailed it. Matt, spot on. And I think, as always, with any particular business or shop, whatever team you're on, the answer is always really, it depends. And one of the things that we've seen, especially in the last few years, before I came to Dell and as a customer, really it's finding that spark for change and understanding that it's coming and what we can do for it. One example of that was a few years ago. I was working for a team that was heavily regulated and heavily compliant. Needed to make sure patching, everything was being done on a regular basis and being held accountable for that. We all have to patch things. We all have to keep things upgraded and within certain version levels. That's just part of what we do in life. And there might be an ops team that does that for you, or you might be responsible for doing it yourself. We had a team a peer team, if you will, that was doing DevOps in a middleware space. So they were doing a lot of message queuing and some Java and all this other stuff. 2,000 front-end servers for that. And they were basically all the same, just variants of each other. And what they did was they came to the infrastructure group and they said, we want admin access. We just want to be able to provision. It takes way too long to get a VM or an operating system, be it Linux or Windows or anything like that. They didn't really tell us why. They just said, we want admin access. And I'm just imagining all of you going, oh, no way, right? There's no way we give anyone admin access, especially in a highly regulated environment, because they don't get the call at 2 o'clock in the morning to go support it or have to fix it when it's broken. But we instead of saying no, we asked why. And we said, hey, what are you trying to get to? What are you trying to accomplish? Because we knew we were working on automating a lot of our processes and getting out of manually building hosts and manually building virtual machines and manually building operating systems and just building in some of the infrastructure's code and automation. And we were using a lot of different pieces of that. You know, there's lots of different tools you can put in that toolbox. So this team came to us and they said, we want admin access. And we said, well, why? And they said, hey, we've got these 2,000 servers. And every month, patches get released. Some of them were Windows with .NET. You guys can just imagine that. And they said every month, instead of focusing on the next thing or more value-added activities, like more automation, being more efficient, they had to stop and patch 2,000 servers. And they couldn't take them all down at once. You couldn't take the business down. You couldn't take the service down. And so they literally spent a month rolling through their environment, testing patches, validating, bringing things up, reconnecting to clients. All of you have been there. And they said, what if we could just, you know, I don't know, maybe provision on demand. We're tired of waiting for VMs. We're tired of having to patch. And we said, okay, let's figure this out. If we work with you, and you know, that's the difficult part, is working with these developers and other teams that are outside infrastructure, because you speak different languages. And came together and we said, what if we could, you know, build a bridge to you, and we enabled you to call the APIs or have access into something like VxRail, and you could use your tools like Kubernetes and other things. And there was it wasn't just Kubernetes. There were other tools in there that the team used to pull off a lot of the automation that they were doing. But what they did was they looked at their app, their legacy application, and how they were building it. And they said, hey, let's go ahead and break this big monolithic thing up. We'll build up some services, some containers, and some functions. And now with the ability to reach into the infrastructure piece, infrastructure as a service, and consume that as a service, now instead of going through and patching 2,000 servers every month, we're going to go ahead and deploy 2,000 servers every month. And doing that through automation and through containerization, that's easy to say, and being able to automate that and taking a month-long patching, if you will, toil into basically a 4-hour maintenance window. So it took some capacity. We had to create a bubble of capacity where they could spin up 2,000 servers and destroy 2,000 servers every month. And yes, they grew and it grew. And we told them, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. We're trusting you with this, because we were proving a point to the business. We wanted to show not only what our infrastructure teams could do, using the platform that we had available to us, VxRail, we could scale it on demand. And then as a software service, allow upstream teams like platform teams and container as a service teams to consume those services and automate what they were doing. And working together, we enabled them to completely stop patching 2,000 servers every single month. And they would basically update their containers, validate them, get a gold image, if you will, and then just substantiate those images every month, test and validate, and then destroy. So it was a huge win for us. It was a huge win for the business. And then as soon as we started talking about all the gains and the wins and the automation, and they started working on more value-added activities, then everyone in the business wanted to come to us. So it was like, no good deed goes unpunished, anyone. But it was the start of true automation and true delivery of services within that company. And it was just a great feeling.
That's a fantastic journey and example, Suzanne. I think this was a couple of years ago when this happened, so it was before. I don't know if you had any level of Tanzu integration or how you're handling that.
Yeah, not by
as
name.
you were doing that,
yep. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
Well, as you were doing that, how did you set up the teams? How did you get over the fact that, how did you build the bridge, or what are some best practices?
One step at a time. And,
right.
And some feet got wet. But really what we did was we carved out a very small, very focused team, and we pulled them out of a lot of their day-to-day activities. So we had to work with what we had. We couldn't go hire an additional team or additional skill sets. And we said, okay, you have Python experience, or you're interested in automation or working in code, and you kind of understand what we're trying to accomplish. We put this team together, and it was made up of VMware guys and storage teams, and we even, we reached out to the networking folks and
developers, app dev.
Yes, security certificates, just
Yep.
getting something on the domain. All those little things, DNS, how do we bring that in and automate getting an IP address? And literally through that process, we took a 12-week provisioning cycle down to minutes, down to 20, 30 minutes. And then on top of that, we said, okay, we've built this, we've tested it, we proved it, no one really knows about it. Well, hey, we can pat ourselves on the back, but really let's take that to the next level. So when that DevOps team came to us and said, we want admin access, and we asked the question, why? Instead of just saying, no, you can't have admin access, that's crazy. That started a conversation and a dialogue, and we had very like-minded, very proactive teams that worked together and pulled it off. And we did it on top of our day jobs, but we did it. And then that got the win in the story. And then leadership, we started demonstrating that for leadership. And it was, well, we want more of this. How can I help you get more of this? How can I enable you? And that opened up avenues for training. It opened up avenues for just more capacity. It opened up avenues for a different way of thinking about how to deliver infrastructure. And that was really the start of it. And I don't know how we're doing for time, David, but
yeah.
If you fast forward, do I have a minute?
You can have a minute. I'll give you 2 even.
Sweet. And if you see a head pop up behind me, that's just Hank, the chocolate lab. He likes to join. So fast forward a couple years, if you will, and I'm at Dell, and I just have this fantastic opportunity to work with this, what is a very, very large customer of VxRail. We have probably 1,300 nodes on the floor, and we've seen it, and we've tried it all. And what the team has been able to accomplish, some peers of mine have really been able to build, is essentially what we're calling our Dell Digital Cloud, and it's a self-service portal. So if you take that example that I just gave of the company that started kind of the infrastructure as a service and the platform as a service, and then being able to consume that, we've taken that a step further. We've obviously, time has passed and we've learned a few things, but we have those services now available in a self-service portal. So our teams, our developers, our business units, and our business partners can go and have a catalog of services that they can click on. They can see how much they might cost in the real world, and from like a showback perspective. That's great for reporting and metrics. And they can self-provision on demand a VM or a container or a function. And it's growing exponentially. We've got maybe 50% of our apps that are being provisioned through this portal now. And I've been doing this a long time, and I have to tell you, every time I see the demonstration and I get on with my peers and we go through it for someone, every time I'm like, this is the coolest thing. So that's what automation can do for you. And yes, it's different, it's hard. It gets you out of kind of building up your ESX and your ESX clusters. You still need to do that. But hey, when you're focusing on automation, now you can really get to the cool stuff. And that's, I think, the message we want to get out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thanks for sharing, Suzanne. Really, I know there's other cool stuff that you guys are doing, and we'll hear more from that. And that's, we talked about a conversation where, and we've heard this for years in the IT transformation. I think the first time I really heard a lot of it was with Chad Sakich. And, there's this spectrum, which is you buy or consume, mm-hmm. or you build. And largely that was contextualized around infrastructure. But I think what I'm gaining from these conversations that we're having is it's also, are you going to buy the software, or are you going to build the software? In this case, you guys had an internal team that needed to build that, or was capable of refactoring the software for the business to take advantage of this new technology. Now, Matt, you guys, I think, are an example of more of a buy conversation where, you know, your job is to figure out really where is the technology going to differentiate our business and where is it not, and go after that. It's not, so we're not going to focus on that. I'm going to buy that service. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys view that conversation. And Jason, jump in. Suzanne, jump in. Folks on the chat, please jump in.
Yeah. So we're definitely, you know, I would agree that's a spectrum, right? I think everybody does some amount of both. But I think we fall farther on the buy side of that spectrum, you know, as compared to Suzanne's example. We often find our customers are buying off the shelf products, and we do have some pockets that are doing, you know, heavy internal development. But overall, as an organization, we're more to the buy side of that. You know, what's interesting is that we are starting to see, you know, a lot of the product vendors that we're buying those software products from are starting to deliver those products. You know, perhaps originally they delivered them as an install, so you would have installed them on Linux or you would have installed them on Windows. You know, and then a lot of them went to, okay, well, I'll give you an appliance. You know, maybe they would hand you a VM appliance and say load this OVA, and now a lot of them are moving towards delivering you a Docker container, right? Pre-built, pre-packaged. So it's, you kind of get that appliance feel with the product, and in a lot of cases, those things, you know, now include all of the self-update, you know, automatic patching. Those are the kind of things I think we've come to expect in the most current sort of software delivery mechanisms. But you're seeing those now coming in many cases as containers, and so I think, like a lot of folks, that's one of the things that's driving us, you know, in our discovery process about, you know, what's the best way to architect to support those kind of packages. Still also, you know, doing custom development, and that, you know, those customers have different needs, right? They want to deliver things very quickly. They want to churn real quickly. You know, they have a slightly different need. You know, when you're buying a packaged piece of software, you may only be getting an update once a month, once a quarter. You know, versus often internal teams are trying to do that continuous delivery mechanism, right? So trying to, you know, I think like a lot of organizations, we're trying to figure out how to service both of those customers and give them both a real self-service experience, but satisfy two really kind of different needs there. So, you know, I think my guess is a lot of people are in the same place.
And Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, no, to Matt's point, it's exactly right. So when we start thinking about which organizations are typically expected, right, to adopt container technology, or at least prepare and adopt modern infrastructure that can support running container technology, the early adopters were those builders of custom software that needed to kind of take on that experience of the application portfolio that business runs. Those were all in-house, and they wanted the control of building it themselves. And they made the decision, maybe because they wanted more application portability capabilities, which containers ultimately, I think we finally reached this idea that the packaging of how I deliver an application, VMs were supposed to be the initial panacea of that application portability entity that I could run anywhere. That never really panned out because you're kind of tied to a hypervisor, and there's different virtual machine standards out there depending on hypervisors, and different cloud infrastructures are based on different hypervisors. So the VM in and of itself is not portable, but containers are. All right, containers run above the infrastructure layer, and this is why the adoption of containers has become so prolific and so popular. Is it gives developers that flexibility to develop once and deploy anywhere. So that application portability provides a lot of flexibility to businesses to determine, hey, where should my application run? And if the business decides it should run in the, the public cloud space, or it should run in-house, I don't need to redevelop my application or come up with some customized way in which I deploy it, right? I can leverage the automation that I've developed kind of once and, choose where the hell the target is. Now, that's great in terms of the containers and who the adopters are. But to Matt's point, the other half of the spectrum is a lot of these independent ISVs who are now looking at how they deliver value beyond just the app itself, but how can I make it easier for my customers to consume my application? And what they're doing is they're developing new packaging options for customers that may want to consume those off-the-shelf applications as a container and still then gain those same benefits of portability on where they want it to run. And that's kind of key. And so you're starting to think about like these container-aware infrastructure platform capabilities. They are now becoming, and hence the term new stack, they're almost becoming just a new infrastructure service beyond what we're typically thinking about with compute, network, and storage, and so forth. Containerization and the ability to run or have container platform services built into your infrastructure is kind of becoming now the new path forward. And I kind of want to just bring this back to the technology piece of how Dell Technologies and VMware are kind of trying to address this space. VMware has certainly taken the lead as kind of the leading cloud software company to really bring in the container story into the value that VMware is delivering to customers, which is to make enterprise-ready infrastructure software platforms easy to consume, easy to deploy, and easy to manage. The last thing we want to do with a lot of these technologies is to be responsible for downloading the open source version and try to build what is my piecemeal platform on using these things versus kind of consuming them as a part of an enterprise supported infrastructure platform. And that's what VMware and Dell EMC are trying to do together with a lot of our Tanzu solutions on VxRail. The entire Tanzu portfolio from VMware is a way in which they can take some of these open source technologies that certainly bring a lot of standardization and compatibility across various cloud providers that provide services based on these same technologies, which certainly help customers avoid the lock-in conversation. But what's unique to what VMware is doing in Tanzu is that they're building that Kubernetes container platform service runtime directly into vSphere. Mm-hmm. So for all of the infrastructure admins who live their day in vCenter, right? We've all been there, and you're so used to the VM constructs. What you're now going to see is really the evolution of vSphere build in these new container constructs, and it's all going to be based on the standardized kind of Kubernetes runtime implementation that VMware is kind of developing into the vSphere kernel and providing that level of visibility to the IT infrastructure team. But then to the developers, they're still able to then consume these services using the same API interfaces, the same programmatic means to deploy containers on whatever infrastructure they want. So the consistent API interface, whether I'm consuming it through a Kubernetes runtime built into vSphere, or I'm consuming a public cloud Kubernetes service, it's the same API. So again, it simplifies the developer experience because I'm creating this container and deployment methodology once, and automating tools that I may develop that talk to these APIs, I develop once, and then I can choose where I actually deploy the applications. So the stack is kind of designed to simplify IT admins' lives, but it's also there to still enable that developer experience that they've come to know, from their public cloud consumption. And our solutions are geared at the various ways you can utilize these Kubernetes services that are built into vSphere whether it be through a regular vSphere cluster, or whether you really want to go all in on kind of this unified cloud platform with Cloud Foundation and develop a hybrid cloud and have an infrastructure that is capable of running traditional VM-based applications as well as container-based applications, and have a common way in which the infrastructure is managed and operated to deliver these capabilities to your development teams. So one last thing, if you don't mind, on that. It all kind of then goes back to Susan's point with organization. So we've all kind of seen how adopters of even just converged and hyper-converged infrastructure forces a change in organizational structure within IT or within any company. Before, we used to buy servers from Dell. We used to buy storage from EMC. We used to buy switches from, name the company that starts with a C. And we would have to build and piece all of those independent things together to now ultimately get what we have now, which is converged infrastructure, which is something I could just buy. And then I could start using that. So I avoid all of that integration work, all of the validation work that I otherwise used to have to do. That's now wiped off of my shoulders of responsibility, and I can just consume it and start running at a higher layer in the stack than that. What's happened in the HCI space is just the evolution of, how those infrastructure products are being delivered, whether it be through a piece of hardware or as software. But the challenges are still the same. I'm now kind of combining what was siloed infrastructure services that were the responsibility of independent admins that had no communication with each other, enforcing now new organizational teams to say, you know what, you are no longer a network team, a storage team, and a compute team. You are now an infrastructure team. And that's the early adopters, and any adopter of CI and HCI, they've come to understand that these new evolutions of technologies do force an organizational change. This level of,
sorry, Jason.
No,
I was just going to nod my head kind of verbally on that one. It really comes down to balancing. It's outcome based. It's what the service you're delivering versus being in those traditional silos, compute, storage, networking, and even upstream from that. So we're really seeing a blending and more balanced teams come together, which I'm sure everyone's heard about at least.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please. That's great. Yeah.
Well, hey, Jason, while I'm going to press pause for a second, we've got one more poll question. So Hollis, can you pull up that poll question? Jason and Suzanne and Matt, you guys can continue this conversation, but I want to make sure we get that in with enough time to discuss the results. And I love how we're going back to, organization and people and process, because I think that's where you can add the business benefit.
Internal, so Dell Digital is kind of the teams that run all the infrastructure for Dell Technologies. And we're going through a massive transformation, including kind of figuring out what our services are, what's our desired outcome, what's the purpose of each individual team. And it doesn't look like a storage team and a compute team or a VMware team. What it looks like is, hey, we want to have like a zero touch type of engineering where we can, as soon as something's racked and has power and is wired, we can start automating the build of that. So we're focusing on creating a team that is can come together and is focused on building out that automation from the minute the nodes are plugged in and we can get to them. And so we're not manually building things up or manually having to configure them. And storage as a service is another one. And really what that comes down to is, hey, storage can now be made available, again, through a lot of self-service, just based off requirements. And when you have a strong standard that's performant and highly resilient and available and scalable, now you can start opening things up to these developers to start consuming storage through their APIs or GUI or however you want to present it to them. And really what it comes down to now is infrastructure folks, when we used to do our job, no one knew our name. that was the best thing ever. But now we're working with our business partners and our developers and partnering with them, collaborating with them as you know, and that's a big change. But now what we're doing is we're delivering that service and an experience, and we're making it easier for people to consume what we're building. And that's really what it's all about. It's what we do everything for is, hey, you want something, I've got it. Here's how you get it from me. And you know, some companies will maybe charge for that, and some may just say, we'll consume that cost. But it's really Jason mentioned it a couple times, it really comes down to the experience people are getting from you as infrastructure people.
So Susan, you brought up a great point of delivering services to your users, right? And I think it's important to, and this was kind of what I was going to tie off on a little bit with how the technology evolves the organization, is asking yourself, who are the users? And is it always who we think it is traditionally, as it's just the application developer team? I think ultimately, as we look to introduce new infrastructure platform services, things like Kubernetes into our environments, you know, I think it's important to really understand, and as personal growth and career development, for those of us who come from the infrastructure side, we hear a lot about DevOps, and it's like, okay, so is this now the new organizational model where IT infrastructure folks are expected to become developers and really go all in and need to know all of the ins and outs of how to manage, run, deploy Kubernetes as a platform, which ultimately is what the developer wants to interface with, is a platform. And who's ultimately responsible for maintaining that kind of platform service? And I think initially, the history of these like born in the cloud companies, they actually have an advantage in some ways because they don't have legacy infrastructure to worry about, right? They can start thinking about leveraging public cloud resources to develop new applications on, and it's the public cloud service provider that's doing all of the underlying legwork. They're just consumers of that infrastructure. So a lot of times these net new org structures for born in the cloud companies, you know, who leverage DevOps, you kind of have two types of teams. You'll have the platform engineering team, which ultimately is responsible for that maintenance of what kind of Kubernetes capabilities am I going to enable? What kind of application platform capabilities am I going to enable for the users of that platform, which ultimately are the application developers, whose job is to develop business level applications. They are not the platform software developers that are designing Kubernetes structures in the open source community. That's not who those folks are. The platform engineering teams are the ones that act as the translation layer between understanding the infrastructure and then being able to map those types of services to the application developer, utilizing those integrations that, you know, Kubernetes as a platform can deliver. And so in some ways, depending upon your organization, for traditional companies that weren't born in the cloud, you kind of have the infrastructure, and then you have the application developer, and there was no middle layer of platform engineering. And so in a lot of the early discussions of DevOps, it was almost like there was only two teams, and the infrastructure folks were the platform folks. And so everybody who's still responsible for compute network storage and virtualization now need to understand the Kubernetes to its full degree, and application developers consume that. And really there wasn't anything new for the application developer to have to worry about. It was all on IT. That's not entirely accurate because we are starting to see a third kind of middle layer within various enterprises that kind of live above the cloud infrastructure team, which, as we've seen, IT infrastructure has evolved with virtualization. So taking on the responsibility of understanding software-defined storage and software-defined compute and software-defined networking is really just an evolution of infrastructure responsibility and how maybe I can enable a self-service way to consume that. But the level of container platform responsibility may not always necessarily fall on the shoulders of that same IT team. Some organizations actually want to develop and create an organizational structure that has a platform engineering group within the company who then interfaces with the cloud infrastructure team and who has that Kubernetes expertise and is responsible for customizing and curating those levels of Kubernetes services for the application developers, because they kind of speak both worlds a little bit. So you kind of have organization to organization. It may be a little different, but it's not all or nothing. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get across is there may be opportunities if you really want to get into that platform engineering world to elevate and learn a lot of new things about the Kubernetes world. And that becomes kind of the new layer that you operate in. Or, depending on organizations, they may allow a little bit of a, hey, I know what that Kubernetes is, but I got another team that is really expert in that you'll interface with, but you're not necessarily responsible for. So we're seeing a combination of both of those organizational models being deployed now as people start wrapping their head around what this DevOps thing ultimately looks like. So it's not an all or nothing.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone on the call, regardless of your role, check out Cube Academy. If you have access to resources, either LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or anything like that. I'm not pushing their services, but anything that you have available to you just to get some of those basics, it's just a really good way to start and kind of understand the underlying architecture and what it can do. Because it can really make your life a lot easier when you start thinking through some of those day-to-day manual tasks that you're doing and how much toil that time you're spending on them. And hey, if I could automate that and I could have a repeatable process, and therefore it becomes kind of a gold standard of that. No human interaction, not making mistakes. Now you have the time to go focus on either learning more or deploying more, or it's that next step in the career development. So I'd encourage everyone to go check out those resources.
Yeah, that's great, Suzanne. I was also going to say that, folks, Suzanne had a great conversation back in November with Chad Sakich. So check out the resources page of the Converged User Group website and see if you want to take a look at that. The poll results are in, and we are short on time. So, Matt, this looks like you and your folks answered this poll.
Look, I think there's another answer here too, right? This space is so rapidly changing, right? We're seeing lots of churn in products being acquired by other companies. Messaging. Let's be honest here, right? Dell and VMware's messaging on this topic has not always been the clearest over the last couple of years, right? So I think we're starting to see more cohesive messaging kind of in the industry as a whole. You start to see product families coming together. Companies are doing their acquisitions. You're starting to see these suites of products mature, right? So I would say that all these things are fair, but I think the other thing that's out there is just this has been a very dynamic space in the last couple of years, and it's kind of starting to still certainly moving fast, but I think you see some coalescence around certain platforms. Yep, great points. Jason, I don't know if I can actually ask you this question, so I will say if you can't answer in 1 minute, we're going to have to do it in another time. But all of this stuff that's available, Matt's got VxRail already in his infrastructure. Suzanne's got VxRail already in her infrastructure. Is what we're talking about backwards compatible for the folks who already own VxRail, or is this a giant lift and shift? What, we're talking to the Converge members here. They probably already own VxRail. If they like what they're hearing or they want to dip their toe, is it possible?
Yeah, so I think one of the great benefits that as part of what VMware is certainly bringing a lot of value to this, customers who already have vSphere clusters deployed in their environment, right? When you are able to update that vSphere cluster to 7.0 update 1, that is when VMware has introduced the ability to support vSphere with Tanzu. So at a cluster level, Tanzu functionality and being able to run containers side by side with VMs on the same vSphere cluster is enabled as an optional feature when you license it and turn it on, if you've upgraded to that software version. So there is no need for a complete net new greenfield deployment just to get started. You have the ability to just simply upgrade. As long as you're at that code level, you can turn on this functionality and start getting familiar with what this does. For those that are a little bit more further along and have looked at wanting to adopt a cloud platform, then the VCF with Tanzu on VxRail is kind of the approach to take, and that would require kind of a net new deployment since it is all encompassing in terms of a standardized architecture design and the full SDDC suite of technologies on rail.
Great. Thank you very much.
Do we have time to answer questions, David?
We do. If you're paying attention to questions, we have time to answer the questions. And while you're doing that, Matt, any further thoughts to or questions to ask of Jason? Kind of some key points for members to consider that you're thinking about that you want to share?
No, I mean, that great conversation. I think a lot of our members are probably in a similar space. There's still a lot of opportunity, still a lot of ability to choose the platform that's going to support your organization the best. I personally appreciate the messaging that's coming out of Dell and VMware on the clear message on the path forward. So great message, and we hope to hear more of it.
Fantastic. Thanks. Suzanne, how are you answering those questions? Are you typing in, or are you just getting your brain ready and you need a speaking slot?
I did just respond by typing because we're running out of time. So I know Robert was asking the question about the self-service portal that I mentioned. And I just met with some teams yesterday to kind of pave the way, if you will, for doing a demo. So we'll get that on the agenda and make sure everyone knows about it.
Fantastic. So panel, thank you so much. Special guests, always great to have you, Matt. Congratulations on your vice presidency for the Converge user group. Thanks for your support, and congratulations, Suzanne. Thanks for your support and being an active board member. It's fantastic. Thank you for your time. Jason, it's always a pleasure. Folks want to know what's behind your head. Is it an R? Is it an H? Is it a G? Who knows? There we go. Thank you very much, panel. Ann and Hollis, thank you so much for your support. I want to thank our sponsors, Dell Technologies and VMware, for helping make this happen. And all of the attendees, thank you so much for joining us. It was fantastic having you here. If you have questions, if you want to hear topics, if you want to share your story, please reach out to the Converge user group, member services at convergeusergroup.com. Reply to these invites or look us up on the web. Hollis has more details, I'm sure. Join us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter and join the conversation is the way to put it. LinkedIn as well. We've got some social stuff there. And we'll see you next time in February. Thank you very much. Hollis, take it away.
Great. Thanks, David. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is a great conversation and a great way to kick off community hours for 2021. As David said, we hope that you join us in February. I put a link to a survey as well as upcoming events in the chat, but be on the lookout for additional details in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, David.
Bye.